Adventure films with female protagonist. By Roland Fahnbulleh Jr. I must admit, before starting my presentation, that I wish that I had just did my project on adventure films genre alone. Researching this subject, the way that I went about it was harder than I anticipated. I thought I would find many writings about this subject, but I could not. I found myself often changing my own growing opinion about the subject as I researched it. I found this topic to be a very vast topic, with not much research done on it, that I could find. No matter what way I searched, it was difficult to find timeline information on the defined stages of woman adventure films. Different stages meaning nascent, codifying, cliché, introspective, mutation, or homage. Most films I mention in this come from my memory of films watched. I could find no list of films under this topic to use as a guide point. With that, please forgive me if I missed chunks of history. Let's begin. In regards to adventure films featuring woman, 2 points are easily definable in the evolution of this subgenre. That is the nascent stage or the where it begins stage, as well as the homage stage, or the stage in where it is honored. The nascent stage for this genre, I feel, can be found in 1912 with What Happened to Mary, starring Mary Fuller and produced by Edison Studios. This was a handful of short female working girl film serials that was produced by Edison with an intent to attract middle-class women to the theaters. Later followed productions such as Dolly of the Dailies 1914, and a railroad adventure series called Hazards of Helen, in 1914, starring Helen Holmes. With this film, the studio was trying to improve on the working girl adventure films, learning from what they saw as flaws in the What Happened to Mary series. These working girl adventure serials films was popular up until the 1920s. Here is a quote about that era by Nan Enstad, written in Feminist Studies. Spring 95, Volume 21, Issue 1, page 67, 24th paragraph. In the 1910s, while the middle class thrilled and wept to stories of working-class women tempted and gone wrong in the perilous city, working-class women themselves thrilled to and cheered very different serial stories in magazines, newspapers, and films aimed directly at them. Reformers, journalists, and fiction writers supplied middle-class readers with vulnerable and helpless working heroines who could rarely save themselves from danger, and these narratives have been well studied by historians and literary critics. 1. In contrast, the early serial stories featured working girl heroines who excelled in their work, bravely saved others as well as themselves, and were rewarded with promotion and respect. The female adventure serials constituted a massively popular genre from 1912 to the early 1920s, but in contrast to stories aimed at the middle class, they have been almost entirely ignored by historians and literary and film critics. In the 30s we have the introduction of color and sound into this genre, and we have the films Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs of 1937 and The Wizard of Oz 1939. Even though this is a morphing stage of this genre, changing from the working girl adventure of a helpless heroine to a young girl adventure, woman adventure film, is still in its creation stage. Ultimately, these years are also part of this genre's nascent stage. It is in this era that the adventure film with female protagonist has begun. Here is a clip from Hazards of Helen. Looking for the codifying, cliché and/or introspective stages in this genre is hard to find. There are many films that come after the nascent stage. For example, in the 1950s, we have Cinderella 1950 and Alice in Wonderland 1951. It is hard to categorize these films for specific stages. If I had to, I would classify this as the codifying and cliché stages of female adventure films, for this may have been the standard of female adventures in film for some time. This was the 50s in America and around the world. Most places didn't see women as equal to men, and women as adventurers, I presume, may not have been a popular idea. Historically, the mainstream film industry doesn't produce many films about woman adventures. There is a great article on this subject by Hilary Oliver, titled "Why There Are So Few Woman Adventure Films," The Gripsch, February 25, 2015. But luckily, or unluckily enough, in the 60s and 70s, TV and film started showing female action-adventure shows such as The Wild World of Batwoman in 1966, Batwoman in 1968, and Wonder Woman in 1975. This was clearly a cliché and introspective stage, and even somewhat of a morphing stage as well. Previously, the clad clothing was not something normal. Nor was a woman as a fighter either. I'm sure the women's rights movements at the time started to change not just their rights, but how Hollywood seen them and was able to portray them in adventure films as well. Then in 1979, we had the biggest mutation film of this genre, which was the film Alien, starring Sigourney Weaver. This film started the Alien saga. One could argue this saga led to films like Tomb Raider, The Underworld, and maybe even to the greatest female adventure film to date, The Hunger Games. The film Alien brings us to a mutation stage that sort of restarts the codifying process of this subgenre. No longer did female protagonists in adventure films need to be extra girly in any sense of the word, other than the fact that she was a girl. She could be complex, the savior, the warrior, and not the princess, and nor were they to have to wear a dress or skimpy outfit or any of the previous normalities of female adventure films. This is arguably the introspective stage again. In the 1990s, we have films such as Pretty Woman 1990, which can be seen as homage to the working girl adventure series of the 1910s, What Happened to Mary and Hazard of Helen. We also had movies in this era like Set It Off 1996 and Thelma and Louise 1991, thus bringing this subgenre to another mutation stage where the women are now being shown in a more complex way than commonly shown previously. Then in 2012, we are given The Hunger Games by Gary Ross starring Jennifer Lawrence. This pays homage in many ways to all female adventure films prior to it. This subgenre's homage stage is currently evolving in our current era with films like The Alice in Wonderland 2010 and with Wonder Woman 2017. But when it comes to stages such as codifying, cliché, introspective, mutation, it is hard to define. Many of it seems all jumbled together, and constantly revolving as it is evolving. But here was my go at trying to do it.